day, everyone. I am Orleen Graves Simmons, founder and president of the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County. I bring you greetings on behalf of the board and our sponsors. We welcome you to our Celebrating Women History Through the Written Word. We are honored to have novelist and professor Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts of Lehigh University with us today. Thank you to Jim Stokely and the Wilma Dykeman Legacy for partnering with the Martin Luther King Association and co-hosting this event of the Prose of Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts. This event is part of our community outreach providing empowerment. The COPE Initiative Committee is chaired by Dr. Michael Dempsey, board member and dean of Lenore Ryan University.
Greetings, friends, from Lenore Ryan University's Asheville campus and on behalf of the MLK Association's Board of Directors. My name is Michael Dempsey, and I'd like to welcome you to Celebrating Women's History Through the Written Word, the prose of Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts. This is a really noteworthy event for the Martin Luther King Association because it's a great privilege for us to host a nationally recognized author in the person of Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts. The reading and interview that follows is part of the MLK Association's Community Outreach Providing Empowerment Programming, commonly known as COPE, which is the programming we do throughout the year after the MLK celebration events that take place in January. I'd like to recognize the Wilma Dykeman legacy because without their support, this event would not be possible. And a special thank you is reserved for Mr. Jim Stokely, who you'll get to meet later in this recording. Mr. Stokely is president of the Wilma Dykeman legacy. Now it's on to the main attraction, which will be a reading from the star of our show, Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts. Dr. Powell Watts is the author of No One Is Coming to Save Us, winner of the 2018 NAACP Image Award in Fiction, and it's also the inaugural selection of the American Library Association Award, selected by actor and avid reader Sarah Jessica Parker. In addition, the book is the 2017 Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. Dr. Powell Watts' fiction has been honored with the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Excellence, a Whiting Award, a Pushcart Prize, and was the finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award. Her fiction and essays have appeared in many publications, including the New York Times, BBC International, Time Magazine, and the 2020 Best American Essays. But there's more to the story because Dr. Powell Watts is one of us. She grew up here in Western North Carolina, in Lenore to be exact. She received a bachelor's degree in English from UNC Charlotte in 1997, and she earned a PhD from the University of Missouri, which was conferred in 2004. She is currently an associate professor of creative writing and African American literature at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a position she has held since 2004. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts.
One of my goals for this summer was to read all of James Baldwin's work. Baldwin has never been out of favor, but his writing is enjoying renewed interest in recent years. The documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, was a critical and commercial success. If Beale Street Could Talk, Baldwin's fifth novel, was made into a film by Barry Jenkins and won an Academy Award. Baldwin has been part of the current national conversation, and it was my desire to read everything that he'd ever published. I decided to start with No Name in the Street, a nonfiction book about the late 60s. On one of the first pages, Baldwin remembers when he was 5 or 6, and his mother said to no one in particular, "I have an idea." She said this at the same moment that she was putting a scrap of black velvet into the closet. James Baldwin says for years he thought an idea was a scrap of black velvet. I loved that moment, the childlike innocence of it. And what it makes me think about is how influential we are to each other, on our children, for sure, but also on our friends, other adults. An idea, an injury, an image can stay with us for years, if not for a lifetime. This brings me to my novel, No One Is Coming to Save Us, which counts as its main influences, The Great Gatsby. The novel has been called a reboot of The Great Gatsby, but it isn't at all. It's not a retelling in any way. Before the novel was published, someone asked me what I was writing about. And I said, I'm writing about a poor family in rural North Carolina set in the very recent past, and they're Black. In other words, I'm rewriting The Great Gatsby. I was joking, but the novel is very much inspired by the main urge in Gatsby, and that's a return home and the irrepressible drive to create what feels like a family. The idea of that green light in Gatsby has captivated and intrigued readers for nearly 100 years, and it means so much more than a light on a dock. What's interesting and exciting to me as a writer are quiet collisions of everyday life, race, class, gender. The stories I write are about the strangeness of that everyday. I think reading and writing are hopeful acts. We do both to explain the world. We explain it to others. We explain it to ourselves. We need stories to recommit ourselves to a time and a place and to reinforce our shared humanity. We are all here on the planet at the same moment, and it's fascinating and illuminating to fill in the gaps of what we know about each other. No One Is Coming to Save Us is about that every day, the domestic, the sphere that typically women know. I don't think that F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gatsby planned to write about race or planned to write about women, not in particular. And in fact, he said in a letter to his editor, Maxwell Perkins, that he probably should have written about women because it might have sold better. But Fitzgerald was writing about the striving outsider. It's a story about trying to love who you are, but about the desperate lengths that we go to be somebody else and to finally not be that person who's always outside. But most of all, Gatsby is about the seeker's earnest attempt to find a place in a changing world. My book showcases women like me, like my mother, like my grandmothers, women who felt trapped by their ignorance of the world, by their own bodies, by their men. My women aim for escape, not necessarily the literal geographical space. The women in my novel are the ones who stayed in the South, not the nearly 50% who migrated to the North over the last century, but they are the ones who stayed. But they wanted to escape the confines of their history and their own thinking. Many things about Gatsby feel like Baldwin's scrap of black velvet to me. Like most teenagers who read the novel, I was taken with the parties, the glamour, the beautiful people, the love story, the idea that someone would remember you and come back for you no matter how long or how far away you were. But what struck me most in the novel, in The Great Gatsby, is the language about the longing of the characters, their desperate desire to forge their own American dream. Jay Gatsby becomes a new person. He sheds all vestiges of his former life. He is no longer Gats, the name he was born with. He is Gatsby, man without a past. The women in my book can't reinvent in the same way, but they are no less complicated and no less strange. I'm interested in the stories that weren't told about the women in this book, the mostly silent objects of desire. What does their American dream look like, and how do they create it? The stories I want to tell are coming-of-age stories in a way. We typically think of coming-of-age stories as stories about adolescence, about kids trying to figure out how not to be kids anymore. We never fully figure out how to be in the world, and that's why I like the idea that all of us are always coming of age. I heard someone say one time that she was 40 years old and she looked around at the world and realized that she knew practically nothing, and that she felt the way that she felt when she was a kid, when she was actually a preteen and a teenager. And I thought that is such a beautiful way to think about your becoming in the world, that you're always learning and that what you don't know always outpaces what you do. So I want to read just a few short passages from the book. This is a story in large part that is a story about love, but it's not about the fantasy of love. It's about the desire from the point of view of America's cheap seats. So once that bubble of fantasy is popped, that's where I wanted my story to start. I wanted a story about uncommon desire. I wanted it set in the home pastures of North Carolina. My characters are past Jim Crow, but they still feel its lingering effects. They are post-segregation, but they see the color line drawn everywhere in their town. The setting is after the heyday of the furniture industry, and places like the town that I grew up in and that I'm from, Lenore, North Carolina, have been hit very hard by mechanization, technology, about plants moving from the South and into other parts of the world. So I will start with just the beginning of the novel. And this part of the novel introduces three of the main characters. And there's a couple named Sylvia and Don. And there's the long lost and now returned character Jay, who is now building a home in the community that he left many years before, a generation before. The house he's building is done mostly. All that's missing now is the prettying, stain on the sprawling deck, final finishing inside. At least that's what they say. This house has been the talk around our small town. Not much happens here, but the same. A 13-year-old girl waiting for the baby her mother's sorry boyfriend gave her. The husband we wanted to believe was good, found out to be the worst kind, with a whole family 2 towns over. The same stupid surprises, the usual sadnesses. But this thing is strange. The boy we all saw grow up came back to us slim and hungry gaunt like a coal miner with money. J.J. Ferguson made it. The poor boy who lived with his grandmother, dead for years now, the ordinary boy we all fed when he wouldn't leave at dinner time, looking like he was waiting for someone to ask him to play. We had no idea. JJ was the newest resident on Brushy Mountain Road. His car, they say, or at least the car they say was his, is parked on the long driveway most mornings until evening while he worked alongside the Mexican men he hired. Every town has a section where the people are rich and their lives so far from yours, you almost expect them to speak another tongue. Brushy Mountain was that place for us. You can't help but get quiet on the road, like your noisy breathing might disturb the beauty, rupture the holy calm that order and clean create. When we were young, we used to love to see the houses, all lit up with their curtains and blinds open, glowing yellow like sails of a ship in the faraway ocean. If we went slow enough, we could see the brilliant colors of their decorated rooms, their floor-to-ceiling bookcases and furniture, floral designs on their wallpaper you couldn't get at the regular store. We might even get a glimpse of one of them, sipping from a mug, snuggled into a chair. Though we knew they lived among us, bought white bread and radial tires like the rest of us, we loved the proof of them. I see him with my own eyes. We breathed in the houses, dreamed about the ones that would have been ours if our lives had run in different directions, if we'd had different faces, if we'd made all the right choices. The first thing JJ did on that mountain was cut out a whole new road up to his house. With heavy machines of industry, Kubotas and Deeres, they dotted the path for weeks like kids' toys in the weeds. Men in town speculated about the tons of gravel, the weight of red clay they had to shift from one place to level the hills. The women didn't care about the road. They knew from their own yards how difficult it was to make a way to get from there to here. They dug their own paths, moved their own dirt and rocks in the stubborn Carolina soil. What excited the women was the river rock foundation, the beautiful windows, the walls rising up like raptured dead. Most days, JJ would be up there himself, walking around the site, talking to the men, or working hard, judging by the sweat-soaked clothes, his close-cropped hair grayed with sawdust. Living in a small town means knowing the news, the broad strokes, as well as the lurid minutia of your neighbor's life. Your dirty kitchen, cancer treatments, drugged out child, all on the sandwich board of your back, swirled around the body with a stink you could not outrun. JJ was from another small town and did not have nearby family. Few people knew JJ to give out too many details. We are not surprised. We knew too little about him when he lived here as a young man. But soon he would show his face. When that house was done, Sylvia knew JJ would be knocking at her door. Years ago, that boy had spent much too much time in her kitchen, on her back porch, staring at her beautiful child, Ava. That JJ had loved Ava was obvious. That Sylvia loved JJ too, like a son, like Devon, her own son, was just as clear. Her son was Devon, pronounced like Levon. Devon was her firstborn baby, the one she wasn't supposed to have. She never had any romance about being a mother and knew that having a baby was easy if your body was willing. Girls hardly older than the one Sylvia passed at the school bus stop at the end of the road every morning became mothers. But Sylvia's body had not been willing until Devon came. She was 30, old in those days, and sure that her baby days were long past. It wasn't that Sylvia loved Devon any more than her daughter, Ava, but Devon was the child that changed her status, the child that made her look at the ordinary world as a big and dangerous paradise. JJ was so much like Devon, both calm boys, funny children with soft voices, with the same warm, puddled eyes like they'd been caught crying and they were trying to recover. Almost a generation had passed, a long time, any way you look at it, but Sylvia knew that the feelings were just there under the pancake makeup of the surface. JJ felt them too. How could he not? He had left them, but he was back. That counted. Of course it counted. They used to say, if you love something, set it free. Don't you believe it? Love means never letting anything go, never seeing it stride on confident legs away from you. You think love leaves? You think you're ever free? Then you're a child or a fool. Flee in the dark, spend a lifetime away, never say its name, never say its name. But one day, or if you are very unlucky, every day, it will whisper yours, and you know you want to hear your name. Say it, love. Please say it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Powell Watts, for that reading. It truly is an honor for the Martin Luther King Association and the Wilma Dykeman Legacy to host you for this special event. And speaking of the Wilma Dykeman Legacy, it is now time to introduce another awesome person to you, one who has the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Powell Watts about her art as well as her history. Mr. Jim Stokely was born here in Asheville and grew up in Newport, Tennessee. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Yale University with exceptional distinction in American Studies, and later earned an MBA from Stanford University. He then embarked upon a 25-year corporate career in human resources for the Hay Group, Brown-Forman Corporation, and Sylvania. In 2011, Jim and his wife, Ann, moved back to the Southern Mountains and now live in Weaverville, here in Buncombe County. As president of the Wilma Dykeman Legacy, Jim produces local discussions, workshops, and other programs in order to sustain the values of his mother, Wilma Dykeman. With Wilma, he wrote Mountain Home, a pictorial history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Jim also edited Wilma's memoir of her first 14 years entitled Family of Earth, A Southern Mountain Childhood, published by the University of North Carolina Press. Jim, we welcome you to the program, and we also welcome back Dr. Powell Watts.
Well, welcome, Stephanie Powell Watts.
Thank you.
It's great to have an opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can spend a few minutes discussing your childhood in Lenoir and Caldwell County, and then spend most of our time focusing on your wonderful novel, No One Is Coming to Save Us, and then finish up with some of your thoughts about education.
Okay.
So this interview is co-sponsored by the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County and by the Wilma Dykeman Legacy. And both of those organizations are in the midst of the mountains, in western North Carolina. You, Stephanie, grew up in Caldwell County on the edge, I would call it on the edge of the mountains. And the county seat of Caldwell County is the town of Lenoir. So did you grow up inside or outside the Lenoir city limits?
I grew up inside. I grew up in a little community called Harpertown, and it's a Black community. It's very small. There are a couple of churches. There are many curvy roads, but it's just a very small Black community in kind of the heart of the town. Yeah.
And did you get out into the county at all, or pretty much stay within Lenoir?
We did. Actually, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we were looking for just a little place to come home to. I live in Pennsylvania now, and we thought we might buy a place that's outside in the county. And when I was a kid, we would often take drives. We didn't have any money, but we had a car, and my Father would put us all in the car, and we were the literal Sunday drivers, and we would take drives all around the area and just look at things and remark on the things that we were seeing. And this is a kind of, my dad is not a religious person and was not a religious person then, but it was kind of a quiet time. You know, we were instructed and encouraged to just think about what the place and space we were in. And so I think it in some ways it was kind of his communion with us and nature, in a kind of quasi-religious way.
Nice. Part of Caldwell County stretches up right to the top of the Blue Ridge Parkway and Blowing Rock and Grandfather Mountain. So did some of your Sunday drives get up there?
We did, and we would usually have a picnic on one of the roads going up to Blowing Rock. I guess that's 321.
Yeah.
And we would stop. We'd just pull the car off the side of the road and eat something and hop back in. Yeah, we went all around those areas. And I mean, when you're a passenger, and particularly a child passenger, I don't know that you know where you are in the kind of intimate ways that you know when you're driving, you know, that you have to be aware of.
Right.
But just being there, I know the place by feel. You know.
Oh, good. Well, you talked about growing up in one of the black neighborhoods in Lenore. That's it's hard to get away from the issue of race in the United States, and we now know that we're just all swimming in a white supremacy culture that has been constructed over the centuries, and it's hard to combat that. And don't know if you have any thoughts about any of that in terms of your own childhood in Lenore.
Oh, it's such a I think it's an interesting and strange kind of way that we grew up in when I was coming up in Lenore. I went in my classroom. I was always the one of the only Black children in the classroom. There might have been a Black child, and you know, this is in communities that I come from, communities that are predominantly African American, and so to then be in a classroom where I am the only one is, at the time, because I was a child and because children just accept what you give them and they have that kind of flexibility, and I didn't think about it in quite the same way that I think about it now, but I was the only Black child in many of my classrooms and had many of those sorts of experiences because of that. And so, you know, I think about that in quite a different way than I thought about it then.
It's amazing how resilient children are up to a point.
Yes.
But if children don't have good nutrition or you know, just growing up in housing that's not standard or adequate, those things can make a huge difference.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh, absolutely. But I think that there's a kind of there's a way in which that we accept things as that we just play them as they lay when we're kids. You know, and it's not until we've had some reflection and we think, well, why do I feel this way? Why do I react this way when such and such happens? Or, you know, then we start to examine the kinds of situations that we found ourselves in and realize this had a start. This didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right. Well, before we leave your childhood, I mean, how do you see it looking back on it? I mean, plus, minus, neutral, you know, the whole Lenore, Caldwell County thing, you know.
Well, you know, that's such an interesting question, and I've thought about it a lot in thinking about writing, particularly nonfiction, and particularly memoir, which I've done a little bit of, and I think that it's on the whole, unless there is great trauma, I think that most people see their childhoods, and as I do, as generally positive. I mean, there's so much joy in childhood. You're always in the space of gaining something new.
Yeah.
And so that's so exciting as, just coming into an understanding of something for the first time or for the first times. All of that is just really wonderful and is good for most kids, and was for me. I mean, there were certainly some traumatic things and certainly some things that I would not wish on my own child, and I'm trying to avoid for my own child, those kinds of things. But I feel like that you're this kind of heat or love-seeking missile when you're a kid, and if you find some people, even a little bit, who can give that back to you, that it feels so reassuring and it makes your life so much better. And fortunately, there were people like that in my life, even if they were temporary, or even if they weren't everything, they gave me something. And so I really do think fondly on my childhood. Now, one of the things that I did not stay in Lenore for the entirety of my childhood, because my parents got divorced, and my mother, we moved around. I lived with my mother, and we moved around quite a bit. So in my elementary school days, I was in Lenore, and then after that, we moved around. And I have come to know, I've come to understand that is a very common thing with single moms and moving and being in lots of different places. So there are lots of different places that I feel like have a stake on me and that I have a stake in, but Lenore is my home.
Well, you talk a little bit about that in your introduction to your collection of short stories. We're taking only what we need. You're a great short story writer as well as novelist, and maybe we might have time for a question about that later. But you were able in that introduction even to put a positive spin on moving around so much. Your mother was a firm believer that in reinvention, I think was your word. Yes. And you strike me as an optimist and a curious person, and that probably is one of the reasons why your novel, No One Is Coming to Save Us, is so remarkable. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that now.
Great.
You've created so many good characters in that novel, mostly African American characters, Black characters. To me, the main character is Sylvia Ross, a 50 or 60 something mother who has lived a tough life, but is definitely a survivor. And then there's her daughter Ava, who in my mind is a bit of a yuppie. I don't know if that's appropriate to say, but she's married to a fellow named Henry Bailey, a man, quotes, who knew he was beautiful.
Yes.
But he's also limited, and of course J.J. Ferguson, who was virtually raised by Sylvia after his father shot his mother. A spoiler alert. JJ's father, when he was very young, when JJ was very young, shot his mother to death. So he was virtually raised by Sylvia Ross. And now, many years later, as the novel begins, JJ has moved back to Pinewood, and Pinewood, let me say, feels a lot like Lenore. Let's just call it Pinewood. JJ's moved back to Pinewood, and he's built a mansion on posh, brushy mountain road. And as we've just heard in your reading, as early as page 6 of the novel, we learn that, quotes, JJ had loved Ava, with a strong implication that he still loves her. And again, to repeat your great reading, they used to say, if you love something, set it free. Don't you believe it? Love means never letting anything go. Now, you've described various ways of loving in this novel, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I wanted the novel to circle around the idea of love, and romantic love is important and a driver for all of us, because we either reject it or because we're trying to live it. But I didn't want it to be the main driver of this story. There are many ways to love somebody and something, and I wanted to show some of those ways, and the ways that are sustaining for us are often not only with a romantic partner. And so I wanted to foreground these kinds of love relationships in the book.
Love is a pretty complicated thing, isn't
Yes. Yes.
it? One of the kind of sub themes that runs through this is the older generation versus the younger generation. Do the racial facts of life make this conflict more extreme or urgent for the Black community, or is it kind of similar for everybody?
I mean, I think there are definitely differences between generations, and definitely different, scenery and stage dressing for different generations. When I was a kid, I was on a landline phone to my friends as much as I could be, until either my father or my mother said, "Get off that phone," and I did that. I did that every day I could. I had so many long distance phone calls, just that whole thing. My son is 10. He doesn't have a phone, and even though he desperately wants one, but his generation's on the phone all the time. You don't see someone without the phone in their hands. I mean, the stage dressing is different, but the ideas are the same, that this kind of need, especially at a certain time in your life, for connection and kind of constant affirmation, and this just being able to express yourself to someone immediately. And that's the kind of thing that especially adolescents want, and even tweens too, but want that kind of constant back and forth, that kind of sonar. When you go out into the world, you present yourself in a certain kind of way, and you're just sending out those vibes, and you're hoping somebody pushes them back and says, "Oh, you're nice. Oh, you're good. Oh, you're," that kind of thing. And so I feel like that there are generational divides, and there are certainly differences, and we're not dealing with the same kinds of problems, but the nuggets of the problems are probably the same. At least I think that they're very, very similar. My parents grew up in Wilkesboro and in North Carolina. They were some of the first people to integrate the Liberty Theater in Wilkesboro. Those kinds of things. So they know a different kind of landscape than I know. I am post-segregation generation, but we're still having the same kinds of issues. Who is allowed? Who is valuable in this space? Those same kinds of core issues are still there.
Well, one of the great examples of the sort of a generation gap in your novel is Sylvia and her daughter Ava. And Ava works in the local bank, and she's also trying to get pregnant. And her mother seems to constantly remind her that life is no bed of roses, and it's almost kind of like trying to bring her down to reality. Whenever she evinces some sort of, in Sylvia's mind, inordinate hope about something, Sylvia's there to correct her. So does that come out of any kind of personal experience?
Oh, it's on some level, I don't know. Maybe that's on some level. It's what we do as parents and grandparents. It's what we do. We kind of say, oh, forget that.
Right. Right.
And you don't want to be that person this morning I was just trying to get my son to practice the piano, and and he so didn't want to practice. It's vacation. He's on spring break, And so it's my job to say, here's what's important, and here are the limits of your life, even as I see them. And I could absolutely be wrong, but as I see them, here are the limits, and I don't want you to get hurt. I'm trying to be that buffer around you to make you vulnerable, and that when you do get hurt, it won't hurt as much because you didn't venture as far. And sometimes as parents, we need to rein that in a little bit. And Sylvia probably needs to rein it in a little bit. And her methods are not always sweetness and light. It's just not her way in the world. And she feels like that there's a world that has not been sweet or light for her. And so it would be, it would not be a good thing for her to tell her daughter that that's what you can expect when she's not ever seen that for herself.
She's not got a completely hardened heart. She's got a big heart, and she's in touch with a kind of a complete stranger who's in prison. But one of the things I like about this novel is that there are just no stereotypes in it. No one is on drugs. And although there's some prison pasts and one prison present, I just don't see stereotypes. How hard did you have to work at that, or did it just come naturally?
I think stereotypes are, they're ways for us to understand the world. They're shorthand for us. And when we have a stereotype, then we say, okay, now I understand that thing. And, it's human nature to kind of reduce things so that we can get to what we're getting to quicker. And I do understand it, but it's not the job of the writer to do that. The writer should be as compassionate to the character as the writer, he or she, can be. And, I read an interview with George Saunders, the really wonderful writer, George Saunders, and he said that kindness is the only non-delusional response to people. I just love that.
Wow.
I think that's really wonderful, that it is a delusion to feel like you know everything and you've got it all figured out and everybody else is in some other place of ignorance. But that you are actually doing yourself a kindness by saying, I don't really know. Maybe there's something here that I haven't seen, something that is hidden, or something that isn't apparent immediately. And I think that giving characters that kind of grace is what turns them into hopefully real people, that you feel like, okay, here's somebody that I may not love, I may not want to spend, my holiday with or whatever, but somebody I can understand because that person has real potential and real flaws.
Wow, that's what a great quote. And kindness is something that we can all do.
Yes.
It's an actionable. It is action. Being kind.
Right. That's
you
right.
take an act. Yeah, that's wonderful. In No One Is Coming to Save Us, you build up a great amount of what I would call potential energy. And that could easily play out in great tragedy, death, people falling apart, fading away. I mean, so easily, many of your characters could have that happen. But things turn out, in my mind, much better than they might have. And did you intend that from the beginning, or did the characters make you do it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of both. I really felt like that I wanted to show a story. We all in our lives have these crests and troughs and these ups and downs. And where we stop the story makes it either a comedy or a tragedy. So if you stop it on a crest, then maybe you're in a different place than if you stop it at a low point. And so these characters have all had really difficult things to do, really hard living before we ever meet them. And so I wanted to move them to a place, not necessarily of triumph, but just a place that didn't feel like they were in that trough at this moment. They're coming, that's the way life is. It's hard things are coming. And at the end of the novel, I wanted to have a kind of dream moment for the characters when something very hard has happened, when people have died that are very important, but that it still feels like that there've been lives well lived. And so that's where I wanted to put them. And I thought, well, where is a place where I can get them through and get them to that moment?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I guess what you're getting at, Sylvia, is sort of a stoic. She says at one point, life is sad, but there's some good moments, and you have to live for those. That's all we got. So that may be a little bit more pessimistic than what you're talking about, but it's kind of getting there.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I can't let the novel go. This will be the last question about the book. Devon, like many folks I've known, it just simply not able to catch on in this world, and the effects on his mother Sylvia and his sister Ava were significant. And I'm just wondering if Devon comes out of personal experience in any way.
Yes, there are a number actually of characters that of people that I've known that go into the creation of this character. He has some probably learning issues, and but he's a very sweet and lovely young man. He doesn't know what to do with himself. His family really doesn't quite know, because they don't understand the extent of his issues, of his mental state. There are lots of issues that are unrecognized, but everybody is trying their best to love him. And and I think, as much more than anything, he's a character for me that is about compassion. The people that I've known in my life who've had difficulties, and just people that I've encountered in other outside of my family, they deserve our compassion, and not because they are virtuous. That compassion should not be based on the amount of virtue that you have. That compassion is a gift for you and for the person, or for the character. And so I wanted to show this character who deserves it, who needs it, and who deserves it, and what that means for the other characters around him, even when they don't really know what to do. They know how to love.
Well, that's great. I hope your words may spur some people to read No One Is Coming to Save Us. It's well worth reading. So in the few minutes we have left, I'd like to talk a little bit about education. And you've been through an interesting path, through various colleges, et cetera. You went to North Carolina State in Raleigh for a couple of years, even though a lot of your friends might have been going to Appalachian State in Boone.
Right.
You transferred after 2 years to UNC Charlotte, got a BA in English, and then a PhD from the University of Missouri. And then you mentioned that you were in Pennsylvania. You and your husband teach, I believe, creative writing and maybe African American literature at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. So I guess my question is, would you say a few words just about your educational journey in general, not from a resume standpoint, but just kind of how has that all felt to you?
It has been a very winding and double back and crazy road. My education When I graduated from high school, I was a good student. I thought I would go to college, and my original idea was that I would be a high school English teacher because
And high school was in Lenore?
No, that was in Wilkesboro.
Wilkesboro, okay.
Uh-huh. And that was my original idea, that's what I would do. And I was a Jehovah's Witness at the time when my parents got divorced when I was quite young, when I was about 11. My mother converted a few years later and became a Jehovah's Witness. And so we all went to Kingdom Halls, which are the meeting halls, for many years after that. And so I thought that I would not, that I'd always assumed that I would go to college and then I would become a teacher. But I thought, well, maybe I need to do this kind of preaching work. Maybe that should be the path that I take rather than go to college. And so I've struggled with that so much for years, really struggling with that idea of what to do. And I got married, and after I was at North Carolina State, and I was one of those students who's married, and now on the other side of that, when I see students, and we don't have many, but we have a few, and I think, oh my goodness, you were such a baby. You were such a baby. But I was one of those babies who was married, and I spent a couple of years, just trying to think about what am I going to do with my life. And these, I think I'm making it sound easy. It was so hard. It was really, really hard. I worked at a shoestring factory, and I worked as a receptionist, and I was just trying to figure out, because I had to have some money, even if I was going to do this preaching work. And I was just trying to figure myself out. What am I going to do? And I thought, I can't do any of my goals until I get this degree. So I decided to pursue the degree. And when I was at Charlotte, UNC Charlotte, I became a McNair Scholar. And if you remember Ronald McNair and the Challenger and that really tragic episode, when an African-American astronaut, and he was killed, and he set up this scholarship, and it was basically set up to increase the number of people of color and people from disadvantaged backgrounds and indigenous people to create space for those people in the professorate. So that was basically what this scholarship was for, to get you through, show you what research is, show you what it is to be in a graduate program, and try to get you to go and be a professor somewhere. And so that program really, really changed my trajectory. And
here you are.
And yeah.
So you've so clearly you've made it. You'll have no more issues the rest of your life.
I know,
life is perfect.
great. I know. I'm really, really thrilled about that. Yeah.
So my mother was a novelist. My father was a poet. Your husband is a poet. You're obviously a great storyteller. How do you think your son will be affected by a poet husband and a novelist mother?
I tell him all the time, I want him, whatever you want to do, I want to do, so whatever you want to be, I'm happy. I'm happy about that. He loves math and science. I would say, I told him, I was at a reading, and I said this at a reading, that my son loves math and science. I don't know where I went wrong. It's, I feel like I need some kind of deprogramming, and a woman came up to me after the meeting, and she said, you should really be glad he loves math and science. I don't understand why you said that at all. So no, I'm just kidding. But he's a writer. He writes all the time. He has several books that he's put together. He's a filmmaker. I think that, writing, like education, is a way to have a conversation, and a way to have a hard conversation. And, when you're in high school or when you're in K-12, the questions are there already made for you. But when you go to school, when you go to the university, you get to say, what are the questions here? What are my questions? What's pertinent and important? And whether those questions are in a lab or in an English classroom, you're still asking those important questions. And so I want him, I think part of a fulfilled life and part of a happy life is finding the way that you can ask the questions that are most meaningful to you. And so if he's doing that, I'm totally happy. If it's surfing, I'm totally happy. But I would keep pushing the books. But if it's surfing, I'm still happy.
That's great. That's great. That's a good parental orientation. Stephanie Powell, it's been great to talk with you. I feel honored to be able to interview you in this setting, and thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my honor.
Once again, thank you to Jim Stokely and Wilma Dykeman Legacy, and especially for Dr. Powell Watts for being with us today. A special thank you to Micah Dempsey for this wonderful program. If you would like to know more about our COPE programming, as well as all other things that the Martin Luther King Association does, please visit mlkasheville.org or follow us on Facebook. If you would like to support our annual Martin Luther King events in January, or our COPE or scholarship programs, donations can be made at mlkasheville.org. We hope that you will support us in our mission to promote Dr. King's dream of equality for all.